Okay, we'll get started. Hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar brought to you by Cambridge Centre for Evaluation and Monitoring, which is all about unlocking potential and maximising performance for A-level students. We're looking at post-16 in this webinar. I'll just run through some housekeeping for the session. So to ensure good sound quality, all members of the audience are muted. If you would like to ask questions, please post them in the questions section, which is located on the right-hand side of your screen. We will answer as many questions as we can at the end of the webinar. You will receive a certificate of attendance sent to your email inbox 1 hour after the webinar finishes, and you will receive a copy of the webinar recording sent via email next week. I'll now hand over to our presenter, Suzanne Crocker. Thanks, Suzanne.
Oh, thank you, Cora. Hello, everyone. My name's Suzanne Crocker, and I am an action researcher, and my official title is Assessment Products Integration Manager. I'm on secondment to Cambridge CEM at the moment. I'm working on a project to integrate Cambridge CEM and Cambridge International products for our international schools to create an effective data culture. Why am I here? Well, I've got 13 years teaching experience, management, and also leadership experience in UK schools. I've led in several schools on data and intervention, including a whole school transformation project using Cambridge CEM data, amongst other data and insights. So today, I'm going to talk about the insights you can use from the Cambridge CEM Alis assessment. I'm going to talk about making predictions at A level. I'm talking about a touch on how Alis might help inform subject choices for students. I'm going to talk about setting goals ahead of exams very briefly, and I'm going to talk about visualizing progress and using Cambridge CEM Alis reports on perhaps how you can have learning conversations with students and parents. So just to give you some context, Cambridge CEM Baseline assessments, or diagnostic assessments they're sometimes called, cover every age group in school, and today we are going to be talking about age 16 to 19 Alis. And also to show you where this assessment support fits in with the Cambridge pathway. So we are talking about the far right-hand side of the screen, Cambridge Advanced, and we've got the baseline testing to measure potential, and focuses on skills, and we've got Alis there, and leading up to the summative assessment, which is the Cambridge International AS and A levels, Cambridge ICE and the Cambridge IPQ. You could also put the IB into that, but today I'm going to focus on AS and A level. And here's a quote from a school that uses CEM data in Kenya, and just to say that it's helped them inform teaching and learning interventions and has resulted in better outcomes. So I thought I would talk about why Alis is different from the other CEM baseline tests. So it measures grade trends in two ways. So the first one is if the school puts in the IGCSE or the GCSE scores, it can make predictions from prior attainment. So that's one measure. But also in the same way as all the other Cambridge CEM baseline assessment, it can use the baseline to measure ability and potential and make predictions based on the curriculum agnostic information that the students put in. Why might you want to have two measures? Because IGCSE scores don't actually result solely from a candidate's performance. There are a range of other factors that can influence performance, as we know, such as age or gender, the family background, school climate, as we have found out with the breaks in learning due to the pandemic, and sometimes teaching and learning strategies. So I'm going to talk about both measures of grade trends and how you might use them in conjunction with each other and also with teacher judgment. So what are these baseline tests for? I would say that there are 4 areas: planning and focusing teaching, predictions and target setting, identifying underperforming and overperforming students, and evaluating teaching strategies. So looking at the first one of planning and focusing teaching. So this gives you teachers and heads of department a very quick, objective, paperwork-free, workload light way of getting an idea of the overall level at which to pitch their classroom teaching, looking at the class as a whole, looking at broad strengths and weaknesses, but also getting to know their individual students very, very quickly, looking at strengths and weaknesses, who's going to need help and support, who's the most able, who's going to need extension work and challenges. So here is an example of an Alice baseline score. And as you can see, we've got a list, and this is an overall score, a vocab section, a maths section, and a non-verbal section. And the areas to look at would be the standard score, so, and the band. Now the band, Alice divides the cohort up into A, B, C, and D, and puts the top 25% in A, and so on right down to D, where the least able or the lowest scores go into band D. So it gives you an overview of what the cohort is like. And here is an example of an individual profile. So at the top, we've got the information in table form, and where you've got the standard score, and then you've got the band. I'm not going to talk about star 9s and percentiles today. For me, as a head of department and a teacher, I would be interested in the standardized score and the band, and also looking at the graph underneath, because I'd be looking at patterns. So for example, for this particular student, vocabulary ability is above that 100 line. 100 represents the average, and if you want to talk statistics, it's 100 plus or minus 15. So the average area is between 85 and 115. So this student has above average vocabulary ability, but they have below average maths ability and very below average non-verbal. So I'd be looking for patterns, and for example, I might be saying perhaps this student will be very strong at something like English or history, but might not be so strong at something like maths or science. The information from these reports can be used for predictions and target setting. They could be used for motivating students. They could be used for talking to parents. They could be used for making subject choices. This next report is called a chances graph. So you might then move on to talking about predictions from this. And if you have a look at this graph, you've got for each grade 2 predictions, one from the GCSE or the IGCSE. Remember I said that you could put in prior attainment grades from GCSE, and then the algorithm will predict forward, or you can have the predictions from the baseline test. And it's good to have both, because then the teacher or the school can make predictions based on professional judgment. So if we have a look at C grade, oh, perhaps I better explain first about chances graphs. So Alice takes the scores and the information about the IGCSE from this individual student and then looks at the data that is in the test from previous students who've taken the test who have similar profiles and have gone on to do A level or AS level, and excuse me, it will map out which grades they got. So for here, the C grade, so the prediction from the IGCSE prior attainment score is 7% got a C with this particular profile. From the baseline test, 9% got a C. And then so on and so forth. We've got for B, we've got 13 from IGCSE, 16 from baseline, 15 from IGCSE for A, 10 from baseline. So it gives us an idea of where we could put predictions for this particular student. And if I was looking at this, I would have a learning conversation with the student and with the parents probably, and talk about A stroke B. So the challenge would be an A, and we would talk about motivation, engagement. We would talk about perhaps support classes, perhaps revision guides and things like that. It could be based on the subject teacher's professional experience that they would say, well, in my experience and knowing the student, I would say that this student is more likely to get an A, or the student is more likely to get a B, or perhaps they are not as working as hard as they should be, and they might get a C if they don't put in some extra work. So based on this particular table, you can see here, if you've got new students coming in, so for example, you have a sixth form college, for example, or students that are new to the school, you might not have the GCSE based points and a prediction based on that particular prior attainment. So actually having the alternative predictions from the baseline tests is very useful to orientate the subject teacher and support their professional judgment to set predictions. In this area, you can see the data for this student shows that possibly they underperformed at GCSE or IGCSE because the prediction from prior attainment is a B, but the computer adaptive baseline test predicts them at an A. At this point, it'd be the subject teacher and their professional expertise that would look at that and say, okay, well, give a prediction of an A stroke B, or I feel that this student is particularly engaged, so I will give them a challenge prediction of an A. The data for this student shows they possibly overperformed at GCSE biology or IGCSE biology because the prediction is an A, but for the baseline, it is a B. In this particular case, I might, as a classroom teacher, monitor this student carefully and make sure they get plenty of support because they've obviously worked incredibly hard at their IGCSE or GCSE biology, and they might need extra support to make the transition into A level. You can also get another report from Alice with predictions, and you can have points, but you can also have grades, as you can see at the top with economics. And you can have the chances graph split out into two. You can have the GCSE separate from the baseline test. So, as I said before, the disparities between the predictions allows a school to see that potentially the student might need further support. And using conjunction with monitoring professional judgment, this is a powerful tool to give the student a better chance of staying on track and achieving their potential. I'm going to talk briefly about the Cambridge Learner Profile Framework, because there are different areas of insight that teachers can gather that all feed into educational success. And Cambridge CEM have been doing some research into this, and I've got this organising framework which is extremely useful for identifying gaps in learning, barriers in learning. So we've got 5 areas: cognitive skills and capabilities. These aren't taught in schools, so very difficult to teach in lessons. They tend to be very stable over time. They're very good predictors of academic performance. Excuse me. We've also got cross-curricular knowledge, skills and understanding. As it says, it's how do you access the curricula? So it might be the level of English, but it's also some core maths skills. And these are not only taught across subjects, but also outside the classroom, discussions around the school, informal conversations. And Cambridge CEM Baseline tests sit in these 2 particular areas of insight. The next area is domain coverage. Domain knowledge curriculum coverage, which, as we know, will be the subject knowledge. So you would put the IGCSE prior attainment in and the A-level curriculum in that area. But also we've got teaching and learning environment, which is all about cognitive load. So you've got, when acquiring new knowledge, we've got to make sure that students have the best possible teaching and learning environment in order to take on new knowledge effectively. So it could be anything from the behaviour in the classroom, it could be home support, it could be outdated teaching and learning strategies. So they would fit into that area. And finally, personal attributes, which is how ready is the student to learn. And these include things like the so-called 21st century skills, and also as an input, the Cambridge Learner attributes, which are embedded in Cambridge International syllabuses. And then educational success would be the outputs, which would be the grades, and also things like the Cambridge Learner attributes would be an output as well as an input. Now, almost all assessments, evaluations and teaching resources can be understood in terms of these 5 areas. I'm not going to go any deeper into it, but if you are interested, we do have a very quick guide, 2 or 3 pages, on this web page, Positive Learning, on the CEM website, about what affects educational achievement. But what I wanted to say in this context was that predictive validity is high when using CEM baseline tests, because, as I said before, the baseline works in the cognitive skills and capabilities area and the cross-curricular knowledge, skills and understanding area. So the first one is the capacity to forge new knowledge, understand meaning from confusion, perceive and identify relationships. And it's a close relative to Bloom's analytical thinking. And the cross-curricular, KSU, is about core mathematical concepts and language comprehension. So is the student able to access the curriculum? Both of these feed into the curriculum knowledge, and they're required in a range of secondary school subjects, and it's a precursor to curriculum coverage or domain knowledge. So what schools can do is they can identify underperforming and overperforming students by mapping against their internal data. So if we have a look at this graph, along the x-axis, along the bottom, we've got the baseline score. So there's a series of stars. Along the y-axis, we've got the school grade. And you can compare baseline scores with the results of any internal assessment in order to spot students who are underperforming and not yet meeting their potential, look at students who are on track and praise them, and identify, praise and learn from students who are overperforming. So here is an example where I've put the art and design exam along the school grade axis, and then we've got the baseline vocabulary score along the baseline axis at the bottom. So this could be a way of monitoring progress and monitoring performance continually throughout the school year. A fourth way that we can use the baseline assessments is by evaluating teaching strategies. So this works best when you have been using Cambridge CEM assessments for a few years, because then you compare your baseline tests with examination grades, and it will help teachers and heads of department understand what worked well in the classroom. It's something called value added. So the idea of a baseline test is it gives you a snapshot of where each student is and what their potential is. So not all students make the same amount of progress, nor should they. So you measure students' potential so that you can make sure as a school that they make the right amount of progress for them. With this value added report, you can then compare the amount of progress that they should have made against the amount of progress that they did make. And you can answer the questions or get data to answer the questions: which teaching strategies led students to overperform and exceed expectations? Which strategies were less successful? And once you have some answers to those questions, you know that you can try and employ the successful teaching strategies again. You know that you can plan resources according to these particular strategies, and you can put in your budgets when you look forward for the year for your new intake. Now, I'm going to show you an example of school value added, and I hope you can see this. In brief terms, you have got something called an average residual. So you've got naught, which is a black horizontal line. So that says if the student has made no progress, that's a black line. So any bars above the line show that the students in that subject have made progress. So if we have a look at some of the green columns, we've got a positive standardized residual, we've got a borderline positive standardized residual in green and light green. And if we have a look at English, English literature and French, they are all green. What this actually means is that the students in those subjects have made a positive progress against their potential higher. No, I'm going to explain this very carefully. Sorry, everybody. So you look at their predictions, and have they met their predictions? Yes. Have they gone beyond their predictions? Yes. So for English, English literature and French, they have made 0.4 of a grade more than was predicted. So you might look at these subjects as a school leader or as a head of department and ask what went well, what teaching strategies went well in these subjects. Could we share with other departments? Could we talk to them about sharing good practice. On the other hand, you might look at the columns that are red, which are below the average residual line of 0. And we've got biology, chemistry, mathematics, and physics. So if you have a look at these, on the sciences, biology, chemistry, and physics, the students had a negative standardized residual, which was 0.5 to 0.6, so half a grade less progress than they should have done. And for maths, it was 0.3 of a grade. So I'm starting to see a pattern here with maths and science and English literature and French. And as a school leader, I will be starting to ask, is the science department, maths department under-resourced? Are there teaching and learning strategies that we could use from English and French that we could use in the sciences? Is it a question of a training need? Is it a question of inexperienced teachers? And then you can start to ask questions, you can put in resources and training. I would just like to put in a little slide about different types of assessment. So in our previous slide, we were talking about the grades that you get at A level, and that is summative assessment. That is what you test at the end of a topic or end of a key stage. And that is final. So of course you want to know how your student is going or progressing by monitoring them throughout the year or the 2 years, and that is formative assessment. And formative assessment doesn't necessarily have to be tests. It could be questions and answers that teachers use in the classroom every single day. It could be quality feedback. It could be peer assessment where students work together to give constructive feedback. It could be more formal and could be looking at analysis tests or exams or essays and setting targets. So this is what your strength is, this is what you did well. And now the next stage to improving is to looking at your weaknesses and turning them to areas of improvement, which you can improve by revising this topic or thinking about explaining your ideas.
Suzanne, please could you pop us back on the same slide as you? I think we're on a one a bit further ahead.
That's very interesting. I don't know how I've done that. No, I'm stuck. I'm really sorry. Sorry, everybody. Oh, did that work?
Yes, there we are. We're with you. Thank you.
So I'm also going to talk about the powerful of different types of data. So when we're giving marks, when we're talking about Alice baseline tests, we're talking about quantitative data. I've got checkpoint scores in there, which are from primary, but you could also talk about GCSE grades, IGCSE grades. That's all quantitative data, they're the numbers. But when you're talking about target setting, or you're talking about information from surveys and discussions, we're talking about qualitative data. And although this is more opinion-based, it is still powerful and gives a snapshot of the students when these questions and targets are set and asked of them. Have I moved forward? Yes, I have. And I know as a subject teacher that I used to dread getting all of this data because I used to get very, very confused with all the different scales, the different presentations of data in words and numbers. So as a school leader, I would say the most simple scale that you can use is RAG rating, red, amber, green. And what we did, especially initially when we started really focusing on data use and intervention, we wrote an agreed definition for each of the colours, and we did some staff training on how to measure for each category. And then the staff, the heads of department, the subject teachers could focus on the red, because it's a very easy way to see any underperformance. And it also meant that they would monitor anybody in amber or yellow because they were on track, and they wanted to make sure that they didn't underperform and move to red. So here's a case study of transition from upper secondary to sixth form. So from stage 11 doing their IGCSEs into the first year of A level or into the AS level. So Lucy is moving to a new school for sixth form and brings with her IGCSE grades, which are put into Alice. She also takes the Alice baseline tests and sits and discusses with a senior leader about her subject choices at A level. And the learning conversation includes predictive data from the Alice baseline and not just based on the IGCSE grades. The senior leaders can use this information for the whole cohort to allocate their resources most effectively. Whether there is more support needed, perhaps they can say, we've got more students who need support in geography, so therefore we are going to have smaller A-level geography classes so that the subject teachers can really focus on supporting those students. The heads of department can adjust their curricula and schemes of work, which are set at, let's call it the average level. They can adjust it with extra support according to the actual needs of their cohorts. Classroom teachers can differentiate or adapt their teaching plans to make sure that every student in their class can achieve their potential. And as I said earlier in this presentation, it's a very, very fast and workload, paperwork-free way of identifying individual students' needs quickly and objectively and giving support to those that need it. So, going back to the framework, I've had a go at mapping Lucy's information, data, insights against the framework. So here I am. This in red is the data and insights that have come historically, so prior information, maybe from a different school, maybe from a different year group. So in domain knowledge, we've got the IGCSE grades. Teaching and learning environment, we've got attendance records. And in personal attributes, we've got reports of motivation and engagement. And we've got secondary school extracurricular achievements and awards. So it's building up a holistic view of Lucy and her colleagues and the whole cohort. Okay, so we might do some assessing with some Cambridge assessment. So bringing some up-to-date objective data. So we've got Alice baseline test there, and as I said before, that's cognitive skills and capabilities, cross-curricular knowledge, skills and understanding. Now, at this particular stage, we might not use a Cambridge English benchmarking test, but we might do, because if we know that Lucy is come from abroad, is an international student, we want to make sure that she can access the domain knowledge and the curriculum. So we might want to make sure that she has the level of English required. For that, I would say possibly with a prior attainment for the IGCSE grade, we've already got some evidence of that, but it is a test that we could do. We've got some qualitative data, so the subject teacher might have conversations with Lucy and the cohort about their attitudes and their knowledge in this particular area, and it's going to be art and design. And then looking at personal attributes, we might do something on well-being, and there's a Cambridge wellbeing check, so we might want to find out how this cohort is feeling about starting a new key stage, as we would say in the UK, or starting A levels, and make sure that their well-being is supported. So I am the art and design teacher, so I've chosen a completely different subject. And I'm interested in prior domain knowledge and art and design potential. So going back to the 4 uses of the baseline data, I'm looking at underperforming and overperforming students and how I can support them in my classroom. So I am looking at Alice baseline data, I'm looking at my conversations with Lucy, and I'm taking that IGCSE grades and data, and I'm looking at all of this holistically, and I'm putting it in a table where I can analyze it. This is just an example where I've put it, the data against each area, and I'm looking at achievement, overachievement, being on target, and underachievement. So learner 1, I think, is overachieving because their Alice scores for non-verbal reasoning, maths and vocabulary, non-verbal reasoning and maths are below average. Their vocabulary is above average, and they got a B in IGCSE art and design. So I think that B is a very good grade considering that they're Alice scores. So I would be looking at their predictions from Alice and IGCSE art and design and having a look and making sure that they were supported because we all know that the transition from IGCSE to A level is quite a big jump. Learner 2, who's below the 100 average line for all 3 areas of Alice, got a C at IGCSE art and design. So we would say that they are achieving, they are on track. And learner 3 is very strong in non-verbal reasoning, above average in maths, but vocabulary is on that average line. So we would say possibly that C is an underachievement and they should have achieved a B, but we are going to look at the predictions and see how we can support that learner. Learner 4, again, with maths and vocab, with the vocab low than the non-verbal reasoning and the maths, they only got a D. So we would say definitely we'd be thinking that they are underperforming. Maybe they should have got a C. Maybe they should have even got a B/C. So we'd be looking at their predictions. Learner 5, very, very able. So we would say a B is underperforming at IGCSE. We would be expecting an A, maybe an A star. So we're going to look at those predictions. And I put this next slide in about the Alice scores, and I probably should have put this in earlier, but it just gives you an idea about the scale for the Alice scores. So we've got 85 to 115 is average, and then we've got information about below average, well below average, above average, and well above average. So if we have a look at this and the predictions, we can see for learner 1, we thought might be overachieving at IGCSE. We've got predictions based on the IGCSE of an A and predictions based on baseline of a B. So we were saying, okay, possibly this learner has overperformed. We've got to make sure that they can cope with the rigor of the demands of the A level. Learner 2, as we said, we think is on target. Learner 3, we've got predictions from IGCSE of a C and based on baseline of a B. So perhaps learner 3 with vocab score of 100 might need some support with their vocab. Remember, you need a good level of English vocab in order to access the curriculum, any domain. So Perhaps that could be a whole school resource, helping with an intervention with perhaps English as an additional language, or some support and resources in improving their vocabulary. Learner 4, possibly a similar profile to Learner 3, but they definitely underperformed at art and design, and they're going to need support if they are going to achieve that higher challenge grade of a B, which is based on the baseline test, which is, remember, is their potential. So they're not going to get there on their own. Some more information, more data, more insights, conversation with that learner will be needed to find out whether it's to do with art and design, whether it's to do with one of those other areas of insight, perhaps teaching and learning environment, and either a subject-specific intervention or a whole school intervention, pastoral intervention. We need to find more information. And learner 5, well, if they are predicted from IGCSE to get a B and then they start at baseline, well, this is an able student and definitely needs some support. So is it to do with engagement? Is it to do with personal attributes? Is it to do with teaching and learning environment? What are the barriers to learning? What are the gaps in learning? So my next and final question is, why use Cambridge CEM Alis and the Cambridge Learner Profile Framework? Well, the teacher can use this profile and also their professional judgment to plan their teaching and learning to enhance their students' education journey. Every student's strengths, weaknesses, and hidden potential is identified in an objective way. If you've been using Cambridge CEM Alis for a while, you can make historical comparisons. If you have put in your A-level results and your AS results, also you can identify effective teaching and intervention strategies that worked and repeat them. The school can get consistent and standardised measures for all students at the beginning of the year. And finally, value added can help schools to reward performing departments and to support underperforming departments with extra resources and training. So really, really, thank you very much for listening, and please post your questions in the question box and I will certainly try and help to answer them.
Brilliant. Thank you for that presentation, Suzanne. And as you say, we've got some time now for questions from the audience. So if you have any questions for Suzanne about everything we talked about today or anything at all, please do post those now. Let me just have a look and see if we've got any coming in.
Have I stunned everybody into silence?
Let's see. Oh no, we've got one here. So this person is asking about if you have any advice on using GCSE or IGCSE data to support sort of understanding of A-level performance, or how you might be able to integrate previous data, I suppose.
So, I mean, I've given you an example of how I might use it. I would definitely recommend using something like Alice, because that will do the predictions for you based on the IGCSE, based on the computer adaptive testing, so the curriculum agnostic information. Why? Because the whole algorithm, the whole of the test is set up to look at profiles, to look at how students have performed in the past, and to look at the students' data or the current students' data and map against prior information to see how, based on actual evidence. Does that make sense? So, because if you were to try and do it yourself, it is very unwieldy, it will take a long time, and you'd find a lot of anomalies. So if you took 5 years worth of IGCSE data and then tried to take the A-level results for those students who had followed the different subject pathways at A-level and looked at their outcomes, that's an awful lot of mathematical statistical work. Can I just say that I'm not a statistician, I'm a modern foreign languages teacher, and I would say that for teachers, heads of department, even senior leaders, their focus is on teaching and learning rather than the numbers, and Alice does it for you, so I would use that as a tool. Having said that, in my experience, and my experience is from a few years ago now, is that if we were looking at IGCSE grades at the time of making subject choices for A-level, we used to say that students should have a B or higher in order to even consider doing that subject at A-level. And even then, they need some kind of transition program, teaching and learning, because the more independent learning skills, the research skills that are required at A-level, well, maybe you do teach them in your IGCSE lessons, but I think it's a big leap up from IGCSE to A-level in terms of that kind of independent learning skills side of things, let alone the subject knowledge.
That's great, thank you, Suzanne. We've got another question here, which is, how would you introduce predicted grades with teachers and then with parents?
That's a really, really good question. I think I would say that it is not meant to be a tool for judging the teachers. I think it shouldn't be used as performance management. It is a tool for supporting teaching and learning and supporting the students. And if it's looked at in that way by the senior leadership team, and that message is clear and carried out with the teachers, that is a good start. There are several ways you can go about it. If you want to start small, find your supporters within the school and perhaps choose to pilot it with a department, or perhaps choose to pilot it with your core subjects, maths, science, English, and pilot it with them before expanding out to more subjects. You're going to have a mixture of different teachers at different stages of their careers, with different experiences of data and insights and different experiences of predictions. So you're going to have teachers that are more open-minded or have an open mindset towards it and see it as a useful tool. Perhaps you could start with them. And then you're always going to have teachers who have a closed mindset and are going to resist the use of these predicted grades. What I can say is that the open mindset and the experience of going through a pilot will be the strongest and most powerful positive force that you can have within your staff. So not using it to judge the teachers, so not using it for performance managing it, using it as a teaching and learning tool to help the students, piloting it either within your core subjects or perhaps as an action research project with volunteers who would like to try it out and see if it works, and they bring in the evidence that it does work, before expanding it to the whole staff. And I would say another really, really important point is to set up a framework. So make sure that there is training, make sure that there is resource, supporting documentation, make sure that these predictions are mentioned regularly, there's monitoring, make sure that it's perhaps the number one item on every single departmental agenda for subject meetings. If you are going, especially within the pilot, if we're going to do it school-wide, so that it's always there at the forefront, that we've got the predicted grades, how are the students progressing against their targets? Is there a problem? What have you done about it as a classroom teacher? What support, what resources do you need? And share. And then that gains momentum as a movement within the school. And then over time, maybe 1 or 2 years, you can say that it is embedded within the school framework.
Thanks, Suzanne. That's really helpful advice there. We have this is a bit of a difficult question.
Oh, no.
So we'll see how we go, but this is what could be done to evaluate students' strengths and weaknesses when he or she deliberately refuses in participating in class lessons?
Ooh. Right. When I showed you the Cambridge Learner Profile Framework, different areas of insight. So if you're thinking that the student is deliberately refusing to take part in the subject, so the green area, the curriculum coverage, it must mean that one of the other areas is not in equilibrium for them. And is it to do with the personal attributes? Are they not ready to learn? Or is it to do with the teaching and learning environment? Is it to do with well-being? Is it to do with home? I think I would say that is perhaps a more pastoral question than a subject question. But I would say whoever had an overview of that particular student, it would be well worth gathering data and information from those areas on that student, and then perhaps having a meeting with stakeholders, i.e. subject teachers, homeroom teachers, and talking about issues. Here's a really good example. I can remember a student who was in my year group who used to behave so badly and refused to do any work in any subject except history. And in history, his homeroom teacher was his subject teacher, and he excelled at history, which didn't make any sense. So we gathered data, and we gathered the teachers, and it's because his homeroom teacher had that pastoral relationship with him and praised him for what he did do right, because he was so used to being told off, that he worked for her in history because of that relationship. And she gave some tips on how to work with him, to the other subject teachers who took on board some of that, and so he worked better in the other subjects. So that is kind of a limited example, but I would gather data and insights. I'd have conversations. I'd perhaps have a learning conversation with that student, or perhaps a senior leader could have a conversation with that student. I'd perhaps invite the parent in and have a conversation with the parent and or student and find out what the barrier to learning is and how the school could support. I hope that helps. That is a difficult question.
No, thank you, Suzanne. That's really helpful. And yeah, you touched on this a little bit, but you're right. I think taking a more holistic approach, and that's where we have the Cambridge wellbeing check. I know lots of people found that a really helpful tool in building that wider picture of the student. So I'll include some more information about that in our follow-up email along with the recordings. I think we've got time for one more question. Just quickly, so someone here is asking, what happens when, or do you have any advice when the predicted grade is way off the realised grade?
Right, so the realised grade, well, with respect, if we're talking about the summative assessment, you're talking about the A-level grade at the end of the course, then I would say that that is too late. So I think effective monitoring during the course is really, really important. And if a student is not making enough progress against their predicted grade, then interventions are required. And in my experience, the first support or intervention might not work. You have to keep trying and trying and trying. And using the framework will actually pinpoint and focus where your intervention and support might come from. What you can do is, if you are at the end of the course and you've got the predicted grade and the summative grade, the end grade, the A-level grade is a lot lower, you could go back. Obviously, the value added for that student, it might well be negative, so, or for even for that cohort or that class, and then you can, as a head of department or a senior leader, go and have a look at the teaching strategies in that class, the resources in that class, and perhaps take a look about what could be done better next time round. So it might be that there's some more professional development required. It could be an experienced teacher that needs mentoring. It could be that that student might have made a wrong subject choice at the beginning and wasn't engaged in the subject. So whilst unfortunately sometimes it's too late at the end of the course to help that particular student, lessons can be learned and fed back into the teaching and learning cycle and the planning and the resource planning in order to improve outcomes next time round.
Brilliant. Thanks, Suzanne. I think that is just about all we've got time for. So thanks once again to our presenter, Suzanne, for your time and your expertise. And thank you everyone for attending and joining us today. If you found this webinar interesting and would like to have a deeper conversation about how CEM can support your school, please don't hesitate to get in touch. You can contact us at cem@cambridge.org, or all of our contact information is available on our website. We have a few more webinars coming up in the coming weeks and months, including next week we have a webinar focusing on the Cambridge Wellbeing Check. So please keep an eye out for your emails with more details to come soon. Thank you everyone and have a lovely day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.